Hi, this is Gary Mandywalker with Life Lenses. All of us wear a set of lenses over our minds that tell us how to look at the world and to bring it into focus. All of us believe there's some type of right or wrong. The question is, where does that come from? One of the things that people often ask me about where my focus is and how I see things is in the area of moral truth. And people ask the question, is there really moral truth, or is it just what the majority believes? Is it just a conclusion of evolution that we have certain types of morals in order for society to survive? Professor C.S. Lewis in World War II was asked by the British government to do a series of broadcast talks. And he wrestled with this argument of how do I convince the English people that there is an evil to be fought in Nazi Germany? How do I convince them that there's a right and wrong? He gave this argument about moral truth. All of us believe there is some type of moral law. If you don't believe that, wait until somebody breaks into your car and steals your stereo, or takes your seat at a movie theater, or you find that you've been somehow unjustly treated. You believe that you've been wronged. The question is, where does that right or wrong come from? We agree that it doesn't come from just within ourselves because we believe that this right or wrong can be imposed upon other people. It's not just a right or wrong for us. We believe that sometimes our governments, our cultures, the different civilizations have done what is wrong, and there is something right to be done. It's true we don't always agree on what those standards are, but most people agree that there is some type of standard that does exist outside of ourselves. So, in agreeing that this law is outside of us, where does it come from? It doesn't come from the government. It doesn't simply come from our families or even from our societies because, again, we hold those all in judgment under this moral law. If it's not inherent in us and it's not inherent in humanity, it must exist above that. If there is a standard that exists outside of ourselves, we have to begin to ask ourselves where that comes from. If there is a moral law, it implies that there's a moral lawgiver. If there is a moral lawgiver, who is that person? It has to be a person. Moral law is a propositional truth set in a reasonable way where truth is being communicated. Lewis proposed that this moral lawgiver is God. If you don't accept God, you have to determine where does moral law come from? How is it communicated in a propositional way? How is it said in a reasonable way? The question is, who's God? The question is, where do you look for the moral lawgiver? Lewis suggested that we find that person in the person of Jesus Christ. He began to give an argument, as most people believe that Jesus existed, that he was a great moral teacher, but Lewis said we can't simply leave the evidence there. Jesus didn't just claim to be a great moral teacher, he claimed to be God himself. We know that Jesus really existed. The question is, do we believe what he said? Was he telling us the truth? Most people would agree that Jesus was a moral man, and most people are willing to concede that in fact he was a great moral teacher. Lewis says that we can't simply stop there with Jesus, though. Jesus claimed not to be just a moral teacher. He claimed to be God himself, the moral lawgiver. If Jesus is God, can he be trusted as the moral lawgiver? Lewis said there's really only 4 conclusions you can reach from this. Lewis said some people could certainly ask the question, maybe Jesus was lying. He wasn't God at all. He was totally aware that he was simply a man and not the moral lawgiver. If that's so, he wasn't a great moral teacher because he was a liar. If Jesus was not God, if he was not the moral lawgiver, then you have to take what he said and conclude that he's a liar and he's not moral at all. It was his intention to delude people. Perhaps he was deluded himself. He believed what he said. He said a lot of great things, but they needed to be cast aside. They just simply couldn't be believed because he was delusional. But if he was delusional, that's not a person who could be the moral lawgiver either. And again, we're going to have to take Jesus and look in a different direction. If he was crazy, you have to include that crazy people aren't somebody you want to derive moral law from either. Lewis suggested instead that we look at Jesus and take him for his word. He says he's the Lord. He says that he is the moral lawgiver. The position you take on Jesus, the position you take on moral law, will change the way you look at the world. It will form that lens for you. And so this week, as you look around in your life, think about how you look at law. Think about how you look at morals and right or wrong. Where do they come from? Who gave them? Who is the moral lawgiver? And ask yourself what you're going to do with Jesus Christ.